Okay, there we go. All right, so we're going to start by reviewing some algebra. We're going to start with 2 times 3x. There's no plus sign, there's no division sign, there's no minus. When they're touching like that, that's multiplication. So that's going to be 2 times 3, that's 6, and the 3 has an x, so it comes along. Okay, that's the difference between adding, subtracting versus multiplying. They don't have to be like terms. So you just multiply them, and that's it. 2 times 3, 2x times 3x is going to be 6. X times x will give me x to the power of 2. When we multiply two x's, you put an exponent of 2. It's also called 6x squared, right? Squared. A little review on division there. When we divide expressions like this, you're going to look at the number, and you're going to see if that simplifies. It does not, so leave it. Well, it doesn't simplify to a smaller fraction or a whole number, so we'll leave it 2 over 3. But then we're going to look at the variables, and we have x divided by x. Well, x represents a number, and there's the same x on the bottom. So if I divide by the same number, or the same x, if you want to think about it that way, we get a 1. Or you could think of it as canceling out. Well, 2/3 times 1 is just 2/3, so that's it. Okay. I have more examples on division up here. 3x divided by 1 is just 3x. I do need you to take note that these are the same thing, and we're going to be going back and forth in our today's notes between a whole number like this and making it a fraction and vice versa. Okay. The next example here, we have 0 divided by x, which is 3x, which is 0. Anything divided by 0 divided by anything is always 0. But check out this next example. It's not the same thing. It is the inverse of it, okay, or reciprocal of it, where now the 0's on the bottom, and this would then be undefined. We cannot divide by 0. Okay. All right. Let's do some more examples, and I'm going to come back to this one in a little bit. Let's do some more examples. We have 1 times 3x. It's just 3x. When I multiply 1 times anything, it's the same thing over. We have 0 times 3x, which is 0, right? Anything times 0 is 0. And then we have a similar fraction from the one above. Again, 2 over 3 cannot simplify to a whole number. So we're going to leave it 2 over 3. But now we have x squared on the top and x on the bottom. X squared means I have x times x on the top and x on the bottom. Well, we just reviewed that if we have an x on the top and we're dividing by the same x, then that will cancel out or divide to give me a 1. And then you just end up with 1x on the top and no x on the bottom. So that's how you simplify it. We've already done this in algebra. So this is just a little review. Alright, let's go back to this one. I'm going to talk about this one a little bit. This is how a lot of your assignment is going to look like, where your numerator is a monomial, meaning just one term, but the denominator is a binomial. You can tell it's a binomial because it's separated by a minus or a plus on the bottom. I cannot simplify like we just simplified this one down here. These are not the same. Okay? This one has a minus 6, so it has to stay together as a denominator. So then my answer will stay 2x over x minus 6. It'll stay like that. I cannot simplify it any further. But I do have a restriction. Okay? My restriction is based on this idea that I cannot have a 0 in the bottom of a fraction as my denominator, because then my math problem would be mathematically impossible and I would have to write undefined. So what is the only thing that would make this denominator go to 0? Well, the only thing that would make this denominator go to 0 would be if x was a 6. Why? Because if I have x minus 6 or 6 minus 6, then the denominator would be 0. So my restriction here is going to be x cannot equal 6. Any questions up to right here? We'll get into it a little bit more. In a little bit, we'll have more examples, okay? If you have questions, speak up. Alright. Now, when we multiply our functions, we're going to have expressions, and we're just going to have to review a couple of things. If you have a monomial on the front, and you're multiplying it to a binomial, meaning you have one term here, and you have two things in the parentheses, we're going to distribute. You guys remember distributing, I hope? 2x times x is our first one. Well, 2x times x is x to the power of 2x squared. Then 2x times that negative 6 will give you negative 12x. So that's distributing. Hopefully we remember that. Now the second one is actually very similar to the first one, except that our monomial is, or the one that's just one term, is in the back. But it doesn't matter. We can do 2x times negative 6, so negative 12x, and x times negative 6, which is negative 6x. So same thing, this term has to be multiplied times both of these, and then up top here, on the top here is this term times both of these. Okay? So same thing, whether it's in the front or it's in the bottom, it's still distributing. Questions? Okay. Alright, the next one is multiplying binomials. This is called FOIL method, if you remember. Okay, it's been a while. It's called first, outside, or outer, inner, or inside, and last. So if you look at this, the first one would be the first two terms in the parentheses. X times x is x squared. Then we would multiply the outside terms, which would be these two. So that's 3x. And then we would multiply the inside terms, which would be these two, which will give me a 2x. And then we would multiply the last terms, which would be these two, plus 6. Alright, then we would combine like terms. There's no other x squared, so that stays x squared. These two are like terms, so those will combine to give me a 5x. And there's no other regular number without a letter, so that's 6, or variable, stays a 6. Now that's one way of doing it. Another way, which is the same, you get the same thing, and really it's the same process, but I like to call it the rainbow method, where you multiply the first one times the first one, the other one, and then you multiply times the second one, and then you do the same thing with the second times this one, and this time this one. I like it as, I call it the rainbow method because it looks like a rainbow on top and a rainbow on the bottom, but you end up with the same thing. Okay, so it's just a kind of slightly different order, but still the same answer. Alright, so that was reviewing. Now it's time to start it. So in your assignment, it's gonna look like this, where you have a dot. That's gonna mean we're multiplying. When you have a line there for a fraction, that means we're gonna be dividing. So let's look at our first example. We have f times g of x equals blank. So we're going to get the f function, and we're going to multiply it times the g function. And the g function is a binomial, meaning we have two, so we got to put it in parentheses. Then we're going to distribute this x times the first x, so x squared, and then times the 2, so 2x. Once we've done that, then we are done. We've multiplied the f function times the g function, and that's it. Questions on here? Okay. Now let's do division. Division is a little bit different, but actually it's not more difficult. We are going to make a line for our fraction or our division here. We're going to put the f function on the top, and we're going to put the g function on the bottom, x plus 2, right? G on the bottom, f on the top, okay? Now, I cannot simplify this any further, so that's my answer. But I do have a restriction. X cannot equal a number. Well, remember, I cannot have a 0 in my denominator, in the bottom. So when I look at this, what value of x would make the whole bottom or the denominator go to 0 or become 0? Anybody? No? Well, it would be negative 2. You see that? X cannot equal negative 2. Why? Oh, actually, my whole answer is everything. X cannot equal to negative 2 because negative 2 plus 2 give me 0 in the denominator. So that is my restriction. So this would be my answer. X divided by x plus 2, comma, x cannot equal negative. Questions? Alright, let's keep going. Example 2. So same thing, we're going to multiply, and then we'll divide. So let's multiply the f function times the g function. Okay. So I'm going to do the little rainbow method because that's what I like. So x times x will give me x to the power of 2, or x squared. Then x times negative 3, negative 3x. Then I'm going to move on to the 4. 4 times x, positive 4x. And 4 times negative 3, negative 12. Then we combine like terms. There's no other x squared, so that stays x squared. The negative 3 and the 4x both have an x, so those are going to combine. They're different signs, so I have to subtract and keep the sign of the larger one. That would be 4. Positive. So 4 minus 3 is positive 1. Bring down the 12 because there's nothing else it can combine with, and this is my answer. So again, that's just algebra. We've done it before, so hopefully it's not too complicated. Let's do the next one, the division one. So put your line, write the x plus 4 on the top, the x minus 3 on the bottom, and that's all we can do there. So we have to stop. We're done with the division, but I do have to do one more thing. I have to tell that if there's a restriction. Well, there is. I cannot have my denominator equal to 0. And the only number that would make it equal to 0 would be what? Can somebody tell me? I don't know if anybody's still there. 3, right? 3. If x is 3 here on the bottom, 3 minus 3 would give me 0. So 3x cannot be 3. If x is 3, then I would get 0 on the bottom. So if I was talking about domain, that's my x values, it would be all real numbers except 3, right? X cannot equal 3. Alright, let's do another example. We're going to multiply 2x plus 3, parentheses, Now I'm going to multiply it times the g of x, which is 4x minus 5. We're going to do the rainbow method, or 4 if you want. 2x times 4x is 8x squared. 2x times negative 5 is negative 10x. Then we move on to the 3. 3 times 4 is positive 12x, because 4 has an x. And 3 times negative 5, negative 15. Then we combine like terms. There's only 2 like terms. It would be this one and this one. So the 8x doesn't combine. Just bring it down. The 10 is a negative 10, and that's a positive 12. So we're going to subtract. Keep the sign of the 1. And bring down the 15. And that is my answer. Let's do the division. We have f of x. So that's 2x plus 3. And then g of x, so that's 4x minus 5. And I cannot simplify anything from there, so we leave it. But there is a restriction. I cannot have the denominator set equal to 0. So I actually have to figure out what will x not be equal to. So I'm going to do it over here on the right. Okay? Over here, I'm going to put 4x minus 5. And I want to know what value of x would make this go to 0, because that's going to be my restriction. So I'm going to do a little bit of algebra. Add a 5. Because we need to solve for x. So what do to one side, do to the other, add a 5. Yeah, this one wasn't that simple because it wasn't just two terms. There's a lot more. Well, there is two terms, but there was a lot more numbers. So that's going to be equals 5, and bring down the 4x. And then we need to get rid of 4 by dividing by 4, dividing by 4. So x equals 5. So 5 over 4, excuse me, 5 over 4 will be what would make this equation go to 0. So 5 over 4 is my restriction, a fraction. So if I plug in 5 over 4 in place of x, it would give me 4 times 5 fourths minus 5. Well, 4 times 5 fourths would give me 5, and 5 minus 5 would give me a 0. Okay? So that's how you do it when you have more than one term or something a little bit more complicated in the denominator. Set it equal to 0 and solve for x. Questions? Okay, almost done. And this is my last. Oh, almost done. Okay. Next example, we have 2x squared plus x. Then we're going to multiply times 2x, which is just x. So this is going to be distributing from, I guess, back here, from the right side. So that's going to give me 2x to the third power, and then x times x is going to give me x squared. And we are done. There's no combining. The x to the third and x to the 2 are not like terms, so that stays like that. Now, the division one is a little bit different than the other ones. 2x squared plus x over x. This one's different because I can actually simplify this one. Though I don't think you have an example of this in your homework, just FYI. We're going to be able to look at this, and I can actually factor out an x from both of them because they both have an x. So if I factor out an x from x squared, I'm left with 1x. And if I factor out an x from x, that would be a 1. Or think of it as dividing it out. If I divide an x out, it will cancel out with one of the x's, so I'm left with only 1. And then x divided by x is 1. Okay, so we factored out an x on the top, and I have an x on the bottom, and these would cancel out, and my answer, we're left with 2x plus 1. But I do have a restriction, comma, x cannot equal 0. Because originally I had an x in the denominator before I simplified, and if I put a 0 there, then that would make the whole thing undefined. So as long as x is not 0, then we're good. Alright, last example. We're going to again multiply first, and then we'll divide. This is a good example. Okay. Now I have a whole number or a monomial, and then I have something set up as a fraction. So in order for me to multiply these easily, I'm going to put a 1 over the 4x squared. That way I can only focus on multiplying numerator with numerator. So 16x squared, right? 4x times 4 is 16x squared. Excuse me, 4x squared times 4 is 16x squared. And then denominator with denominator, which is x. Okay. Oh, wait, it still simplifies. Well, that means I have 16x times x on the top. Not that many x's, just 2. And then over x. Well, one of those x's is going to cancel out, right? And I'll be left with 16x. And if you want, you could put over 1 or just 16x. Okay, so a little bit of review on fractions. And this next one is going to be the same thing, so careful with these fractions. We have our division sign. We have our f of x on top, so 4x squared. Our 4 over x, which is our g of x on the bottom. But we cannot divide by a fraction like this. So we're going to have to rewrite it. And if you remember your procedures for multiplying or dividing by fractions, When we want to divide by a fraction, we multiply it by its reciprocal. The reciprocal of 4 over x is x over 4. Then we can put a little 1 underneath the 4x squared so we can multiply straight across. So 4x squared times x is going to be 4x to the third, and 1 times 4 is 4. Well, 4 divided by 4 is 1. You can put 1x to the third or just x to the third. Okay. Alright guys, let me post your ticket out question. If you have any questions, let me know. Now would be the time to speak up.